on his guitar and said, "This machine kills fascists." So, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, my friends and my companions. This Labor Day, we're going to talk about the role of labor, that is, the labor movement, in the struggle for social justice. First of all, we must say that the struggle for a decent wage, decent, safe working conditions, the struggle for maybe a week's vacation, shorter hours, all these things are a struggle for social justice in and of itself. Without unions, without strikes, without a fight back, we would not have the 8-hour day, the 40-hour work week, paid vacations, sick leave, health insurance, job security. These gains were won only with fight back, with sacrifice, often with bloodshed. I'll give you a few examples. In 1937, on the south side of Chicago, 10 striking steelworkers were murdered, most of them shot in the back by Chicago police and company thugs. Not one killer was arrested or punished for their crime. This is the famous Republic Memorial Steel Day Massacre. Memorial Day Steel Massacre. In 1914, in Ludlow, Colorado, scores of workers, women and children, were massacred by National Guardsmen and company thugs. Again, not one killer was punished for their crime. The height of the outrage was there were women and children, there was an encampment, there were women and children sleeping in a tent, and the National Guard set the tent on fire. 1932, the Ford Hunger March, sometimes called the Ford Massacre, was a demonstration by unemployed workers in Detroit, Michigan, which took place in the height of the Great Depression. The march started in Detroit and ended in Dearborn, in a confrontation in which 4 workers were shot to death by the Dearborn police and the security guards employed by the Ford Motor Company. Again in Chicago in 1894, the Pullman workers and railroad workers were brutally suppressed by the U.S. government, the U.S. Army, over 30 workers being killed. In 1877, in the middle of a massive depression, I have to put my glasses on here because the print's too small at this point. In the middle of a massive depression in 1877, railroad workers in West Virginia went on strike. Soon the strike spread from St. Louis to Baltimore. It was virtually a nationwide general strike. It was the biggest, in some respects, the biggest labor action that ever occurred in this country. They were actually took over Pittsburgh, and they had like a workers' government for a day or two. Within 6 days from the beginning of the strike, first blood was drawn when the Maryland National Guard troops confronted striking workers in Baltimore and opened fire on them, killing 11 and wounding 40. Over the following 2 days, Pennsylvania National Guard troops killed 40 striking workers in Pittsburgh, firing upon crowds and bayoneting the strikers. At the same time, the federal troops killed as many as 18 striking workers in the streets of St. Louis. Several of these places, but particularly in Pittsburgh, the local National Guard refused to fire on the workers because they were workers themselves. So the government was forced to bring in U.S. Army troops from Baltimore or from some other place to do the dirty work. I could spend an hour recounting all the killings and the repression over the years, but you can see, I think, that we've only gotten to the point of polite bargaining that we have now, or handshakes and smiles. We've only gotten to that point through bloodshed and suffering. And now today, these benefits, these accomplishments so bitterly fought for, well, they're not written in stone. The bosses constantly chip away at the gains that workers have made. And with the current administration, the gains that the working class has made are increasingly at risk. Like the civil rights song has it, freedom is a constant struggle. When I started working in the steel mill, in 1970, there were maybe 20,000 working in the Gary mills, 11,000 inland in East Chicago, 7,000 in Youngstown, probably 5 in East Chicago, 5,000 or 6,000 in Republic Steel in South Chicago, where that massacre occurred. Where I worked. Okay. Today, due to automation primarily, less than 20% of the former workforce produced the same amount of steel as was done in 1970. Today, the chances of a young man or a woman coming out of high school, getting a decent job, buying a little home, having vacation, having insurance for themselves and their family, that was a reality in 1970. Today, it has disappeared. That opportunity, that kind of life was destroyed or slain on the altar of productivity and profits. Union membership in the United States has been declining over the years. In 2024, 9.9% of the workforce in this country was unionized. In 1983, it was 20%. Today, as we celebrate Labor Day, it's not just reminiscing or remembering the good old bad days. We honor the struggles of the past, and we celebrate and promote the struggles of today. People are struggling and fighting everywhere. We see the workers are, some of the unions are in the forefront of struggles defending the rights of immigrants, fighting against the Trump administration's schemes and programs. And on September 6th, there will be the AFL-CIO here in Chicago. The Chicago Federation of Labor is having a big celebration, a parade, and a festival. It's going to take place in Pullman. The parade will start at 11 o'clock and goes from 103rd and Cottage to 112th and Cottage, and there'll be a festival. It's called the Eddie Fest, which is in honor of Ed Sedlowski. Raise your hand if you've heard of him. All right, if you're Ed Sedlowski, who was a very important steelworker, leader of the Steelworkers Union in South Chicago, and he was actually became the president of my retirees chapter for many years. Well, we've been having an Eddie Fest for a number of years in his memory and his honor, and it'll be fun. There'll be games, there'll be food, there'll be music, and that'll be at the park, right? It's 114th. I don't know the exact, 114th near Cottage. I'm sorry, I don't have the details. Huh?
It's where the national park is.
Right, the museum there. So that's next Saturday. So the labor movement itself has been a profound social justice movement that has fought to better the lives of millions. But the U.S. labor movement was born and raised, suffered and struggled and prospered in these United States. It dwells in the belly of the beast. None of us, iron worker or professor, can escape, deny, or ignore the original sins of this country. Ethnic cleansing of the Native Americans and the kidnapping and enslavement of Africans really is one sin, if you will, the sin of racism. And consequently, the labor movement has been tainted with this sin, if you will allow me to use that word. So at best, well, I don't have to say at best. And the fact is, the history of the labor movement in this country is a checkered history. Do you remember the words of Eugene Debs? I spoke, I asked you if you kind of remember, talking about the duty of the left, the working class movement, to stand up for the rights of, colored workers, the terminology they used back then. He led the American Railway Union and the Pullman workers in an heroic struggle for workers' rights and the 8-hour day. Another struggle brutally suppressed by the government. A struggle that still resonates, still inspires many of us, and Eugene Debs has always been one of my heroes. But the union, the American Railway Union, led by Eugene B. Debs, did not allow black workers into its ranks. So, I have some personal experiences on this question. So when I hired into the mill in 1972, that was a few years after a consent decree had been signed. Now, a consent decree was a result of a suit that was filed by black workers in Birmingham, Alabama, against the companies and against the union, because the unions and companies had set up a seniority system that made it very easy for the company to keep the mills segregated. So that had come into effect maybe 3 or 4 years before I got in there. And it changed the way seniority was calculated. It used to be, before the consent decree, it was unit seniority. Whatever unit you were in, you had seniority in that, and anybody that came into the unit after you, even if they had been working in the mill maybe 15 years or more than you, they were below you in seniority. So a black worker coming in to your unit, a better unit from the coke plant, he was below you. Maybe you hired in a year ago, and this guy was 15 years seniority. He was behind you in promotion. So that's how they maintained segregation. And I remember there were a number of white workers, craymen they were, and they were really upset. Or maybe they weren't craymen. The reason they weren't craymen is because some black workers would come into the department and they got the jobs as craymen because they had the seniority, and that's not right. We're supposed to get that. They didn't say because they were white, but really that's kind of what it was. But even with the consent decree, when I started working in the mill, the track gang, they used to have miles of railroad track in the mills because they moved the hot metal and the steel and the slag, everything was moved by railway cars. And the tracks were always getting, turned or twisted, or had to be repaired. Track gang was all Mexican, all Mexican. The bosses, the foremen were mostly white, maybe a couple of Mexican bosses, all Mexican. Coke plant, blast furnace, probably 80% black, which not the best place in the world to work, coke plant especially. Machine shop was all white. All the shops, the crafts, the plumbers, the carpenters, the millwrights, the crane machinists, all white. Actually, the machine shop was not only all white, I think you had to be Serbian. I don't even think they let Croatians in there. So, a lot of just messed up. So, that's the way it was in steel mill. And that was run by an industrial union whose mantra was workers united, stand together, and there was still all this racism and segregation. Yeah. And the craft unions, the building trades, the racism is so well known, it's almost a cliche, it's a commonplace captured by Bill Brunzi's song, Get Back, in which he said, I won't try to sing it. Let that go. Me and a man was working side by side, and this is what it meant. They was paying him $1 an hour, they was paying me 50 cents. They said, if you're white, you're all right. If you're black, if you're brown, stick around. But if you're black, oh brother, get back, get back, get back. That's the craft unions. In the 1970s, following the lead of Richard Nixon, construction workers, the hard hats they were called, in New York City brutally beat anti-war marchers, the police standing by, arms folded. Riots and massacres by shop owners. I'm really going on here, I'm going to speed it up. Riots and massacres by shop owners, workers, good Americans. They rioted and killed Chinese workers in the late 1800s. The mine or the mill workers would pit, the bosses would pit Chinese workers against American workers, driving down wages and speeding up the work. The bosses benefited. Chinese and American workers suffered. Unfortunately, instead of solidarity, we saw massacres, lynchings, and people driven from their homes. On the other hand, in 1892, in New Orleans, black and white dock workers, New Orleans of all places, united against the dock bosses, resisted race baiting, stood up against the police, the Jim Crow media, the racist mayor, and won major concessions and recognition. For a while. It didn't last, but they did stick together and they won for a time. The CIO stood for industrial unions for everyone in a plant, mine or mill, men and women, black, Hispanic, and white, as opposed to the craft unions who would organize carpenters or iron workers, millwrights, etc., into separate unions, usually keeping out black workers. The UAW in 1963, we remember it as a march for freedom, but it was also a march for jobs. Its organizers understood that the fight for racial justice was tied to the fight for economic justice. Right today, flight attendants, postal workers, the NEA, National Nurses United, the SEIU, United Auto Workers, the UE, United Electrical Workers, are there just some of the unions who call for an end to Trump's attacks on immigrants. So, as I say, it's a checkered history. So now I get a little philosophical here. I work with two guys in the mill. They both came from the South. Ronnie came from that little bit of Virginia that kind of scooshes in there between Tennessee and West Virginia. His father died from black lung in the coal mine. The white guy. Where he lived, there were no black people that he associated with. He worked with another guy, Charlie Neely, who was from Holly Springs, Mississippi. He had never worked in Mississippi with a black person. He might have worked for a white person. He might have worked for a white person, but he never worked with one. They worked together, and they both became cranemen. And I could see over the years a change. They became friends, work friends, but the real change was they worked together, they filed grievances together, they had the same problems. So it was a black worker and a white worker together against the common opponent, the person they were dealing with. And I think to a certain extent, and a real extent, it changes the way people think, changes their ideas and ideals about how the world works, coming together, working together, struggling together. I've been on a lot of labor marches and protests and where we chanted either Pueblos Unidos Jamás Serán Vencidos, or I like it better, Obreros Unidos Jamás Serán Vencidos. People united will never be defeated, or the workers united will never be defeated. And the history of the labor movement proves the truth of that chant. When workers unite, Black, Latin, and white, when women are able to give leadership to struggles, that's when workers win. And here at this church, we're standing up, we're helping immigrants, and we did some really nice stuff a couple of years ago. People really worked hard for breakfast and providing shelter and all the things that we did. So I see a couple of people in here that really worked their butts off. We're standing up for gay and trans rights. We're saying that black lives do matter, opposing genocide. So why do we do these things? Because it's right. That's the simple answer. It's the obvious answer. But I believe we do these things for ourselves. We need to do these things for ourselves. It's not charity to oppose racism. It's not charity to oppose homophobia. It is survival. Because we are all of us, Black, Latin, or white, gay or straight, bound together by real and concrete mutual interests. And in this present day, we face many of the same dangers and challenges. I will end with what were to be my closing words. And this is a cautionary message. These words of Martin Niemöller, the German Lutheran minister, speaking about the Nazis and himself. And he wrote, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there's no one left to speak for me. Thank you.
Please rise.